All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Christianity on the Spectrum. For those listening for the first time, this is a podcast about 10 years of ethnographic research that I've been doing on autistic Christians and ex-Christians, covering around 26,000 different autistics, doing long-form interviews with over 500, and thousands of successful surveys answered. This is a podcast trying to look at the intersection between autism and Christianity, specifically ASD1, or what used to be called Asperger's, high functioning autism, and PDD-NOS. And for this podcast, we'd like to take a look at various different online autistic communities and the communities that autistic Christians tend to find themselves in. Today, we're going to be talking about effective altruism and the autistic Christian overlap with effective altruism. I remember my first exposure to it. I wasn't a Christian at the time. I had deconverted from Christianity, and there was a event going on at an adjacent university to the Royal Military College where they were talking about EA, and I had never heard what EA was, but I read into it a bit, and I thought, I'm sure I'm going to meet my people here. These people sound like the type of people I want to be with. So I showed up, and there's a meme online that's like, "Oops, all autism." That was my experience of my first EA meeting. It was a bunch of computer engineers and computer scientists at Queen's University all meeting together to hear a philosophy professor talk about EA, or I don't think they were a professor. I think they might have been a PhD student. Anyway, they were talking about effective altruism and what it is. And I remember listening to it and it was like, all right, done, sold. This is what I am now. This is what I'm doing now. And I signed on to what's called the Giving Pledge. And I basically just started going from there, attending lots of different EA movements over the years. I have been in and out of these circles and in and out of these spaces. But one thing I've noticed is that there are tons of people like me in EA spaces. I often joke about how I find it really difficult to find other people like me, and it's hard to find other people that I can find who are just immediately on my wavelength. I have not found that to be the case in EA communities. I go there and at least like 20% of the people are just John clones of various different types and stripes. And so to talk about EA with me, I have my guest, JD. JD, why don't you just introduce yourself?
Hello. Yeah, happy to be here. What do you want to know?
So first of all, who are you and what's your organization or
Awesome.
organizations?
I'll go through all the demographics. I'm JD Bauman. I'm 28. I'm married. I have a kid like you. I have a young kid running around at home. Not quite running. He's just starting to crawl. I run a group called Effective Altruism for Christians, or EACH. We're the Christian sub-movement within the Effective Altruism global movement. Effective altruism, what is it? It's two things. It's this idea that if you're trying to do good in the world, you should try to do it better and as best as you can using careful evidence and reasoning. So in the case of charity, not just giving to charity or to whatever tugs at your heartstrings, but whatever seems to have good evidence that it would do the most good per dollar, for instance. This also applies to careers, not just working at any job, but if you really want to have the biggest impact possible and do the most good you can, then spending a lot of time thinking about how you could use your career to tackle important global problems and make an outsized impact through your time. Or it might be through your influence. How can you use your voice, your connections, your networks to promote important causes? But I think all of this is sort of applying a contemporary analytical approach, a data-driven approach to doing good that maybe wasn't possible even as little as 50 years ago. In a world where you have massive problems, millions of people dying from preventable diseases, including like very systemic, hard to measure problems like climate change, it seems like you have to use data and evidence to really take advantage of the highest leverage ways of doing good. And effective altruists are all about getting together and talking about that. So that's one, the idea of effective altruism. Two, it's also a movement of people, Christians, non-Christians. I just happen to run the Christian community within this movement, but thousands of people who go to conferences and discuss what are the latest and greatest ways to, say, tackle malaria, to reduce preventable deaths from neglected tropical diseases, to alleviate animal suffering, to do good in whatever ways we're trying to do good. And that's the movement. There's also a lot of online discussions, an 8-week intro fellowship you can do for free. And we do conferences for Christians who are interested in this. So we do two every year, one in the US and one in the UK. I got involved in this because I was working in New York City in finance, and I was earning what then was a lot of money. I mean, I was like 18 at the time, working as a gold trader. And I did the math, and it was like, oh yeah, I could be saving 20 lives a year with my income. And I'm not doing that. And there seems like something like maybe not wrong that I'm not giving all my money to charity, but like a really big opportunity here. But when I looked around at like other Christians in my lane who were in finance, they didn't seem as keen about like using their money to give to global poverty. And then I found this site called 80,000 Hours, which is all about finding evidence-based ways of having a high impact career. And then I learned about effective altruism through that, through, you know, a long series of events, and realized there's an important Christian angle to this and a lot that Christians can bring to the table as well. So that's maybe more than you wanted to know, less than you wanted to know, but a little bit
Oh,
about
that's
how I
great.
got here.
Yeah, people often ask me, okay, but what is EA? Like a one sentence answer, and I often joke, what if you were really autistic about charity? I mean autistic in a good way. If you are like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm going to be emotionally detached, data driven, and analytical, and I'm not going to let my feelings impact my decision. I'm going to do the best thing that makes the most sense the most efficiently. And that's sort of what the EA ethos is, I guess.
That tracks, and it does draw a lot of people with autistic tendencies or people who identify as autistic or diagnosed autistic. I think a lot of people in the movement would consider themselves autistic even if they're not diagnosed, or like
Yep.
and when I describe effective effective altruism to like very normal people, if I could say that, like
Yeah.
so sometimes I get the reaction like, oh yeah, this feels very like nitpicky, autistic, and you know, sometimes they don't mean it in a negative way, sometimes they do mean it in a negative way. In fact, I think that's something the movement wrestles with, is it has this optic of being very nerdy. It has an optic of being autistic, and I think part of that's for, you know, correctly diagnosed. It has a
Yeah.
higher, I don't know the numbers, you probably know that better than I do, but
Yeah.
higher propensity.
Why does this autism machine keep generating autism? Yeah, no. So I don't know the exact numbers on this, but I've done a lot of looking into it and surveying other EAs and other EAs who are autistic, and just sort of doing this because I've been in and around these circles, and autism is just something that I find very interesting. As another autistic person, I sort of have the meta autistic special interest of being interested in autism, and so I estimate it's probably around 1 in 5 people who are actively involved in these movements who's on the autism spectrum. Either they either know it or they don't know it. Most of them at this point, I think, know it because of so many other EAs that are autistic. You're probably going to run into one of them, and then they're going to be like, "I'm autistic," and that's probably going to generate something in them that goes, wait a second, you're just like me. And so I think people who know they're autistic, far more common in EA movements. I think the underdiagnosis within EA movements is one of like the few communities where it's not underdiagnosed, where it's probably just accurately diagnosed. And there's a lot of people in the EA movement who, do you know what the acronym BAP means, like BAP?
No.
Okay, so there's this concept. It's quite controversial within autism research called broad autism phenotype, which is to describe autism as a sort of set of cluster traits at a certain level of intensity and severity. And autism is a sort of critical mass of those clusters and traits. But they theorize there's this other thing called broad autism phenotype, which is like a subclinical cluster of these types of traits. So maybe you don't have all the things that would register you as diagnosable, but you're close. You know, you're sort of on the edge. And so like if they're not autistic, there are a lot of BAP or BAP adjacent people within the EA movement, at least from my experience and looking into it. It's sort of like all over the place.
And I think what's also interesting is the degree to which empathy is involved in philanthropic giving, effective altruism, autism. So you have this idea that the reason we should give is because we're moved by a sense of inner compassion for people who are suffering. And I think that's good and true. The question becomes, what about when people don't feel that sense of warm fuzzies or warm glow, right? Does that mean you shouldn't help someone? And when we look at the philanthropic landscape, I mean, one of the reasons why effective altruism exists is because you look at the philanthropic giving in the US every year, and it's hundreds of billions of dollars every year. And a lot of it seems to go to really ineffective causes. So you look at tackling blindness, for instance, and there's this cool charity in the UK called Guide Dogs, which will train a seeing eye dog for like $60,000. But it's cool. It'll help blind people to cross the street and get around, and it's a companion animal, and it provides a lot of meaning to their life. And you look at like the dogs, and you get this warm fuzzy, like, oh yeah, I want to help like train that dog, and it helps someone who's blind to get around, and that seems like a good cause, and so I'll give money there. I think that's good, right? That's a good cause. But you look at the thousands of people around the world who are suffering from trachoma. This is a disease where your eyelids grow inwards and they scratch against your eye and your cornea, and it causes blindness if you don't do anything about it. It can cause blindness. Fortunately, this is reversible, and a surgery costs only about $50 or so, definitely under $100. And so if you run the numbers, you can actually help hundreds of people to receive a trachoma surgery for the cost of providing one person with a seeing eye dog. But one looks much more appealing and it warms my heart more. But the effective altruists want to say you should follow the numbers and do what does the most good, give to what does the most good per dollar spent or invested. And I think a lot of people look at that and they say, like, we shouldn't be telling people to not follow their feelings or follow their heart. But I think a lot of us, maybe especially people on the spectrum, have maybe different wiring and maybe don't have the same. Now, I'm not speaking for everyone. I'll out myself. Like I'm not autistic as far as I know, but maybe I do have like a slightly easier time separating my emotions from my decision making. I think like a lot of people have a harder time doing that, being like, no, the numbers say you should help people suffering from trachoma. A lot of people have a hard time like just biting the bullet on that and doing that.
Yeah, and so I think that's a really good example. Another example of that is a sort of famous EA thought experiment. I think it was proposed by Peter Singer. You can correct me on this, but it's this idea of, so you're walking along one day and you just bought a new suit, and you see a child is drowning in a lake beside you, and you have the capability to save them. No one else is around. No one else can save that child. There's like, you are basically the only option right now for helping that kid. But you just bought a new suit, and diving into that lake to save the child will ruin your new suit and you'll lose $800. But you would have to be sort of a psycho to be like, actually, my $800 suit is worth more than this child's life. And everyone can sort of conceptualize that and go, yeah, of course, I would risk my $800 suit for the life of this child. And then he asks, okay, well, what if this child was like 50 miles away and you had the ability to get rid of your suit to save that child? Okay, what if he was 50,000 miles away and you had the ability to get rid of that suit to save that child? Is there any actual moral difference between these two things, or is it basically just proximity that's affecting your decision on whether or not you'd give away your suit? And the argument is basically like, look, all these cases are morally equivalent to each other, and there's no reason why you should save the child in one situation and not save them in the other. And so if you have the capability to do so by simply giving a little bit of your money to exchange for this child's life, it would be insane not to do that. But yes, this is a sort of like separation of the emotion from the actual problem, because you don't have empathy for a person who's 50,000 miles away who you don't see, right?
And I mean, one way of putting it potentially too harshly is like, these thought experiments force everyone to face situations of impossible compassion, right? Like it's almost impossible to feel compassion for a stranger that you don't know who's suffering from something you don't understand in a country far away, someone you'll never meet. And effective altruism says, I mean, one nice thing about it is there's nobody telling you have to feel for this stranger, but it just acknowledges that you make trade-offs, and by doing nothing when you could do something and you could help, you could wade in the pond, you could jump in the pond, so to say, right? You are choosing to let that person die. It's a sin of omission, perhaps, rather than commission. And I think that's, that's something that people don't like to acknowledge. And I think maybe it's something that's freeing for people who have a hard time with cultivating feelings of compassion in their heart, or like not compassion, but rather who have a difficult inner emotional life in general. And you could speak to this more than I can, because I don't understand autism very well, but my autistic friends tell me that in general, their emotional life is maybe just less dynamic than a lot of non-autistic people, including when it comes to altruism and helping others.
Yeah, so autism is, like, it's important to emphasize, it is a heterogeneous condition with all sorts of ranges of expression. And so you will have hyper emotional and hypo emotional autistics. And I found neither of them really have a significant effect on whether they're interested in EA ideas. Because there's also another really big effect, which is just autistic people tend to be very compassionate. I tend not to use the word empathetic, because empathy is like this internal inward feeling.
Actually, I think that's more what I was trying to get at, is this idea of empathy. It's very hard to feel empathy for someone who's very far away, but you can show compassion through your actions, right? Compassion is a much more active thing.
And I often say a lot of autistic people, while they are hyper empathetic, a lot of us are hypo empathetic, but that has no bearing in relation to how ethical or how moral you are, or how much you care about problems to do with justice and fairness and things like that. And as I've talked about on this podcast, that doesn't always manifest in ways you might expect. I know autistic Christians who are very interested in EA and EA like arguments, who have decided that this is the reason why they should dedicate their life to attempting to end abortion. So that doesn't always, like, people always hear like autistic people have a strong sense of moral righteousness or a strong sense of moral indignation that leads them to behaving morally. And it's like, well, so that is true to some extent. Like, autistic people are generally very concerned with doing the right thing, following the right rules, and being ethical and compassionate, but that doesn't always lead to the places people always expect it to lead. But yeah, with, I think, a really big draw for autistic people to the EA movement is basically that, where it's saying it doesn't, you don't have to feel it inside, but you do need to, you have an ethical responsibility to steward the resources that you were given,
right,
to their most effective ends. And that is a logic that I think is just immediately registerable to most autistic people in a way that, for some reason, I don't see it in most other people. Like, I attended that talk, I heard that thought experiment, that of the drowning child, and I thought, oh, this is so obvious. This is obviously the right thing, and this is obviously the right way to do about it. And just immediately in my head, I went, okay, switch flipped. This is, like, I've updated my priors. This is now how I'm going to be thinking about things and how I'm going to be doing that. And then I try to explain this to my wife, who's very much not autistic, who's probably like the opposite of an autistic person. And she's like, I get what you're saying, but, like, why do you have to be so mean about the Make-A-Wish Foundation?
Yeah, and I think here's where it's good to say and to acknowledge that charities like Make-A-Wish Foundation or guide dogs are doing good things. Like, the world is better because they exist, right? We don't want to get rid of those charities. It's just that we have a limited amount of resources, time, money, talent, and we want to be good stewards. And there's that Christian dimension of stewardship, which we read about in the parable of talents, that God, I suppose God proverbially gifts us different talents or things to steward. And to whom much is given, much will be expected. And for me, it's hard to unsee the fact that some ways of stewarding my talents yield so much more than others. And some people have a very easy time on seeing that. But I think it's perhaps easier if you've never thought about these things. And I think vibes and culture create spaces like, there's a lot of social pressure to conform to certain ways of doing things, including around charity, that allow us easy outs, that we don't have to ask these questions. I think in morality, that's very much the case. And maybe that's one way or one reason, and I'm curious of your thoughts on this. Maybe that's one reason why autistic people are more drawn to effective altruism, is because it doesn't follow normal vibes or cultural norms around giving, but it takes this very first principles approach, emphasizes analytical reasoning, and is very okay when the conclusions seem kind of crazy, like giving money to people you don't know, or helping animals in very strange forms. Like, we could talk about the Shrimp Welfare Project and some of the animal welfare stuff that's going on as well. I'm curious about your thoughts on those as well. But
yeah, so I think that pretty much hits the nail on the head. A lot of autistic people just like don't vibe with the general vibes, don't pick up on what the general vibes should be, but respond really well to first principle arguments about why you should do things, and having it laid out, especially in a data-driven way. Like, I found with my podcast work, like, the discussions on autism and what autism is are great for autistic people, but putting it in front of them and saying, okay, this is the statistical breakdown of people within this category and how they generally behave. That is something autistic people love, right? Where it's like, oh, you're empowering me with information and with data for how I can better make my decisions. This is great. I often describe autistic people in the EA movement as sort of getting nerd sniped, which is something that I think happens a lot. I mean, it happens to me too. All the time. I'm like one of the biggest victims for nerd sniping, where you like come up with an
somebody
interesting
mentions the
math
Battle of
problem.
Stalingrad, and you're like, oh my gosh.
Well, it's
3 hours
like
later.
someone like gives a interesting thought experiment with like numbers and figures and data about how I should better be acting, and I'm like, yes, I need to investigate this. I need to process it. I need to analyze it. And EA communities love that. And EA communities are also just, I think another big draw is because
a quick plug for the forum too. I don't know if are you on the forum much? There's a forum, Effective Altruism Forum, which is pretty actively posting write-ups of the kinds of analyses you just described, and excellent source to learn more.
Yeah, and like the things that are going on there, and the sort of cultural dynamics of EAs are something that I think does another big thing for attracting autistic people. Because like I said at the beginning of this podcast, one thing that a lot of autistic people find when they join EA communities is that because so many autistic people are in these communities, the sort of social norms and ways of interacting and ways of presenting your ideas and ways of discussing things are very autism friendly in a lot of these communities. Like, they are, I often joke that autistic people, or sorry, I often joke that Christianity just doesn't know how to talk to autistic people. Like, it doesn't know how to translate its message into an autism-friendly format, but EA's like, if there's one group that translates their message into an autism-friendly format and autism-friendly social norms, it's like EA groups. That's not saying every autistic people is going to love being an EA, but like, of the EAs that exist, there's a reason why so many autistic people stay, and there's a sort of feeling of, oh, these are my people, these are norms I can accept. Like, a really big part of EA culture is self-critical analysis, like data-driven self-critical analysis of your own ideas, and like ranking things and categorizing things, and like going into deep dives and doing sort of adversarial simulation of what would be the steel man against this. There's a
people
really
are often
heavy overlap
asking,
with rationalist communities.
Exactly. People are often asking for red teaming, so somebody conjuring up an alternative argument against their case and trying to defeat it, working as hard as possible to do so. Also, in other instances, effective altruists might, and when I say effective altruist, I just mean somebody who like would agree with the basic ideas behind EA. For some people, it is like an identity, like autism might be an identity, or Christianity might be an identity. Not for everybody it is. And it doesn't have to be. I think Christians often helpfully view it as a tool that helps us better love and serve others. So I just want to flag that. It doesn't have to be an identity. But yeah, many people in these spaces will do these red teaming exercises or steel manning points they disagree with. That might even be like the existence of God. So there's interesting Substack forums or posts from effective altruists, like articulating cases for Christianity that are better than I've ever read by Christians at times. And that's just quite useful for building a robust worldview.
Yeah, and so like when we're talking about why are so many autistic people EAs, and like why is the organization, why are so many of us there, why is it disproportionate when you look at the general population and then the EA communities, I think those are basically the reasons. It's just like, it is, if there was an organization that like was able to speak to my people the best, I think it would be like the EAs and the rationalists, which are both heavily intersecting communities.
I think there are some social disadvantages in the effective altruism movement and rationalist movements in communities, and I think the Christian edge helps with some of this. So I'd be happy to talk about that.
So that was going to be the next thing I wanted to talk about, because EA communities,
you've done a great job selling EA communities, and I agree. Yeah. I think they're wonderful, and I'm continually inspired and impressed by the people I meet. People who, for instance, a lot of people give away. I mean, like a very normal action is people give away 10% of their lifetime income to the world's most, what they believe are the world's most effective charities. And I think that creates, when you're in a community of people who've made concrete actions for the good like that, it just creates this really positive, like social pressure. We're not like pressuring people to like, dress in a certain like style or like, or adhere to like very silly social norms. We're like encouraging each other to like, to do what does the most good, right? And that seems like a very Christ-like good thing to me.
Yes,
and there is this like one-upmanship
at times.
Yeah, I mean, so I think, and we can talk about that in a bit, but I think there is a bit of a one-upmanship where people are trying to like do even more good. And I think it's less comparative. People aren't like judging each other, but I think there is this culture of like outdoing one another in doing good, which reminds me of the scripture passage where I think Paul writes, outdo one another in showing honor. And what would it look like if churches were really living that out? I think the effective altruism movement is doing a great job of trying to outdo itself in finding new ways to do good. And many people are really inspiring, giving away lots of money, including like middle-class people, giving away like large chunks of their income or large amounts of their time for causes that will never repay them. And maybe not in this life, but I think, I think God smiles in heaven when he sees this. But I think there are some issues. Like I think when you have, I think the church for all of its issues has evolved certain structures, like really healthy pro-social norms. Like I think Paul has like, and the New Testament letters have like really good advice about how to deal with disagreements, where you have if one brother disagrees with another, then they should go to him and tell them directly. And then if he doesn't listen, bring two people. And then if they don't listen, bring the elders, right? And bring the whole church involved. On EA forums, you'll have a disagreement posted on a forum with thousands of people, and it will just be like, here's my disagreement with this person. And, massive reach right away in a way that can feel, I think, very, very challenging. If that was waged at me, I would find that.
So EA cultures, I will say, have all of the problems of every single online autism culture, and it's often sort of like hypercharged due to the culture of EAs. And
it's also evidence-based, right? So it's not even like, here's why I dislike this person. It's like, here's all the evidences for disliking this person, right?
Yes. And you can't dislike someone for petty reasons. It always has to be like well-reasoned and well-argumented, or else no one will respect it. You can't just be like, I have a petty disagreement and I don't like this guy's attitude. It's always like, this person is literally the worst because of what they did or what they said here. And so, like, to be clear, there's a reason I don't participate in EA community. Like, I don't actively participate in EA communities anymore, and that's mostly because I get like super bad religious OCD when it comes to EA topics. And while I consider EA people my people, it sort of drives me a little off the wall. I often
Yeah.
say I have EA brainworms, where like I get, like I said, I get nerd sniped by problems where I start to like feel immense guilt for
Mhm.
buying a coffee or something,
Yeah.
because I'm like, how many malaria nets could that have bought? What if I
Do you think
didn't?
that's bad to ever ask yourself? Or do you think it's like
Oh
the
no, I don't
degree
think
to which
it's
you were asking it like every day, every
I
hour
don't
kind of
think
thing?
I don't think it's ever bad to ask those questions. I think it's bad to obsessively
For
ruminate
context,
over those
$5
questions.
for a coffee will buy someone in a developing nation about 15 days of life who otherwise
Yeah.
would die from
Yeah.
malaria. That's the kind of comparison we're talking about here.
Yeah. And like turning literally everything in my life into like, okay, how much malaria prevention could I have done with this thing? And like, should I be doing like should I go on vacation with the rest of my family? Or while I'm on vacation, I'm just driving myself insane, doing like cost comparisons for everything, turning them into like real numbers, and then not being able to socially integrate, not being able to do all these things because I'm sort of obsessing and ruminating over these things. And like, I realized for the good of my own mental health, I had to remove myself from these contexts, or else I would literally drive myself crazy. And so, like, I still agree with the principles of EA stuff. It's just a lot of the times I'm like, I will become less of a functional person and less able
Sure.
to do these things because I'm now like actively harming myself with irrational rumination and things like that. And so it's like, okay, well, what is the cheapest, lowest cost food that I can buy that'll still hit my nutritional goals?
Sure. Sure.
Or like should I eat less and just put myself on a calorie restricted diet so that I can do that? And it's like, okay, this is probably getting to an unhealthy level of rumination. Um
Yeah, there is
yeah.
there's some difficulty there. It's important to prioritize your
Yes.
your own health and your family's health, and you might think you
Yeah,
have a Christian duty, right? When Paul talks
exactly.
about how you should provide for your own household, that he who doesn't provide for their own household is worse than worse than an
Yes.
unbeliever. I think he says so. Pretty
Yes.
strong language. I think
I
yeah,
I
so
have
I think New
I have
Testament
issues with
morality
that.
tempered, or rather, effective altruism like tempered with New Testament morality, or rather, starting with the person of Jesus, trying to be more like Jesus with the guidelines of the New Testament, but trying to optimize in a way that effective altruists encourage. I think that's a very promising way of doing good because it
Yeah.
means that you're not going to sacrifice important relationships on some idol of impact, but you're going to fulfill, New Testament, like what Jesus says is a good life, and prioritize faith and prayer and sacraments and relationships like your marriage and your own health, whilst also stewarding what you have, right? And not just wasting money, including what you donate, or using it for much less effective causes.
Yeah, and like I absolutely agree with that. It's literally just a religious OCD thing, but
Yeah.
where it's just a really unhealthy rumination that I a lot of autistic
I think
people
a lot of
have,
people
and,
have that
and a lot of
too.
autistic people deal with. It's
Yes.
just
Yeah.
it's a pretty big problem within the
And
people that I
it's also an
study.
OCD thing, right? Which I know
Yeah,
is probably like correlated with
yeah.
autism. I don't know
Yeah,
statistics.
there's statistically a large overlap between OCD and autism, and autistic people developing religious OCD. It's sort of just taking a lot of religious views to their fullest extent. So like the one that I keep ruminating on is the Jesus's parable of the goats and sheep, where Jesus says, "I was hungry and you gave me no food. I was in prison, you didn't visit me," and all these things. And I
In
I
Matthew
sort of
25,
sub
right?
yeah, I sort of sub in there. I was at risk of malaria, and you didn't give me $2 for a net.
Yeah.
Hey everyone. If you are enjoying this podcast and you want to support my work or podcast, you can do this in two ways. The first way is by engaging with this podcast on social media. If you're listening on YouTube, you can like, comment, and subscribe, which helps boost the podcast through the algorithm and show it to more people who might be interested in this type of content. If you're on Spotify, you can rate the podcast and leave comments, which also helps boost the podcast. And if you're on iTunes or any other app, you can rate the podcast and leave a review. Doing this really helps tell these platforms that my podcast is good and worth listening to, and will help tell the algorithms to promote my podcast to more people. A lot of people have also been asking if they could financially support my research work or podcast, or encourage me to continue doing this work that a lot of autistic people find valuable. If my work has been helpful to you, and you have the means to do so, I would appreciate if you would make a single donation or sign up for recurring monthly donations to the Against Malaria Foundation. I've provided a link in the description that will get you to the donation page that will donate on behalf of this podcast and give me a message telling me that you've donated. The Against Malaria Foundation has been rated by GiveWell as one of the most efficient charities for reducing suffering and harm in this world by providing malaria nets to people who need them. Dollar for dollar, this is one of the best ways to donate to charity, and it helps reduce a lot of needless suffering in our world. Even small donations can make a big difference. Each net costs about $2 and lasts for 3 to 4 years. For every 600 nets that are bought, it saves on average one child and prevents between 500 to 1,000 cases of malaria. If you have the means to do so, please consider donating through the link in the description, as it helps motivate me knowing that I have some tangible number that I can point to say this is actually helping people. Anyway, that's it. Back to the podcast. And that's sort of like, I think that's a really good impulse to have. I think sometimes you can take it too far where you forget to attach your own oxygen mask before attaching your child's, like the airplane notification, always attach your mask before assisting someone else, is something that I think a lot of autistic people forget to do in these places. But yeah, another really big thing is the sort of Christian part of EAs, because I found overall EAs are not Christian in my community or in my interactions with them. I don't find a lot of overlap between that intersection. So can you sort of talk about that?
Yeah, awesome. So yeah, I come from I suppose you could say Anabaptist background. My father is born in India, and his dad was a Mennonite missionary, and his father was also a Mennonite missionary doctor. And so I thought, anyways, I was really surprised actually when I saw all these effective altruists, who many of whom are non-Christian. I think 80% identify as atheist or agnostic. And I was really surprised when I saw all these atheists doing good in the world when I learned about it when I was like 18, 19, because I wasn't used to that. Like I grew up hearing that yes, God can occasionally do good things through non-Christians, like the king, is it King Cyrus in the Old Testament, who saved the Jews from Babylonian captivity? Is that right?
Yep. The Cyrus proclamation, sending them all home. Yeah.
And I think the one who buried Jesus, was that Joseph? I think
Joseph
the one
of Arimathea.
Yeah, of Arimathea, right? I think we don't know for sure whether I think it's presumed that he was a follower of Jesus because he followed him to his grave, right? But I suppose we don't know, right? But that was more the exception. And so when I saw this movement of non-Christians doing really Christian things, like giving tons of money to poor people, really obeying the Matthew 25 command, whilst also seeing so few Christians in my church giving. I mean, to be clear, Christians in the US give slightly more than non-Christians, but it's a marginal amount. I mean, the average Christian gives like 2% of their income away. I was really confused. Like, you would maybe expect on Christianity that Christians would be a lot more generous and non-Christians would be less. Anyways, so I had a big coming to terms with that. I ultimately both think there's more Christians in EA than people realize. There's hundreds of people that come to our events and our conferences every year. And for reference, we just had the Archbishop at one of our conferences last fall, Justin Welby. The Anglican Archbishop.
Former Archbishop.
Okay, we won't get into it. Yeah. That happened like literally 2 days after he came to our conference. So it was like, in fact, people overheard him like chatting about it nervously at our conference, and we weren't sure what was up. But I hope I hope the church recovers from this, and I hope he's doing okay. I think, yeah, he's made mistakes, but is also trying to make the most out of it and take responsibility. Anyways, I digress. But yeah, I think it's mostly a sociological historical accident that effective altruism is a non-Christian thing. I think something happened in the 20th century that Christianity went out of vogue, that a lot of Christians really dug their feet against science and against reason and evidence. And you had this like elite intellectual class that for the first time ever was in the West, like non-Christian, at least for centuries, right? Like you had like and right now you have in Oxford, among philosophers especially, like a very low percentage of Christian believers. So if you actually take like the base rate of people who are Christian among the text philosophy types from where EA comes and originates, it actually matches with the rate of Christians in the effective altruism movement. I think it's mostly sociological, but I think it's quite sad that it hasn't caught on more. And part of my work is trying to encourage more Christians to get involved, which you could do by coming to our events. You can go to the regular effective altruism conferences, and we do Christian meetups there. But I think a lot of Christians get caught. Well, I think there's a social norm in Christianity to promote giving through your local church and to poverty charities that are recommended by your local church, which may or may not be the most effective. There's also norms around, like, let me take a step back. I think a lot of Christians also take issue with the utilitarian nature of effective altruism.
That's something I was just about to bring up.
So it's not necessarily, effective altruism, as I mentioned earlier, is just this idea of using data and evidence to find the best ways of doing good, right? So simple idea. But then there's a deeper ideology. Like you can think of it as like an iceberg, right? You have the iceberg meme. You have the tip of the iceberg, and it's like the tip of the iceberg is just like use data and evidence to find the best ways to give and to use your career. But then when you go beneath the surface, it's like the next level. Yeah. So the next level is like, well, you should expand your moral sphere of the beings that you think are worthy of moral consideration, which includes animals on factory farms. There are tens, hundreds of billions of animals that suffer on factory farms every year. It includes people living across the ocean who you'll never meet. It includes future people, because presumably your grandparents aren't morally more or less valuable than you, nor are you more important than your grandchildren, right? You're all kind of equal people made in the image of God, right? So you should actually value future people, and to the extent that you can affect them, you should prioritize those actions. If you can affect more future people than present people, you might want to prioritize helping future people most by like preventing an extinction event or something like that. Especially if like the future holds trillions of people, right? Then maybe the most impactful thing you could do is stop some kind of extinction event by the numbers. So that lends itself to some idea called long-termism, which is this idea that promoting a good long-term future is among or is the most significant moral priority of our time. And you start getting into these weird probabilistic cases where if you think that morality is about not
Min-maxing?
just following duties. Sorry?
Min-maxing?
I don't know what this term min-maxing means. I've heard of it, but
So min-maxing means minimizing your costs, maximizing gains. So like in morality, it would be like minimizing the bad things you do, maximizing the good things you do. It's like a game theory term for minimizing your costs, maximizing your gains. And so yeah, like and it's usually like when it's used colloquially on the internet, it's mostly used to doing a lot of math to determine the most efficient pathways, regardless of where those lead, and often has a connotation of like extreme probabilistic analyses. Which
I feel so bad because I took game theory and I'm on these discussions and I've still forgotten this term. But yeah, exactly. So here's an example, right? So a common cause prioritization issue that comes up is like, would you rather have like a 90% probability of saving 50 lives or like a 10% probability of saving 500 lives? And it's almost a near certainty that you'll save 50 people's lives, or almost very unlikely that you'll save anybody's life, but you might save 500 people's lives. So I'm actually curious how you would resolve that trade-off if I ask you.
So I mean, it depends. My way of answering that would be, I need far more information about this. So
Okay, well, but
mathematically,
let's just take this pure thought
mathematically,
experiment, right?
yeah.
Like,
Okay, so purely as a thought experiment, you should go with the 10%, right? Because the
okay.
10% is slightly more lives saved mathematically than the 90%. Saving 50, then 10% saving 500.
So this kind of expected value reasoning can get really weird if you're dealing with really small probabilities of really big outcomes. So an outcome might be like preventing human extinction, right? Because then you count all the people alive today, but then also all of the value of future people, which might be like billions, trillions of like trillions of lives, right? But your probability might be like 0.0001, right? And so you might end up in these situations where you'd rather focus on like preventing some kind of AI takeover from destroying all of humanity rather than helping people alive today dying of malaria. And you can justify that on the numbers if you're just using stylized numbers like that. And you're right to take issue with some of these numbers, but I think people dislike these kinds of utilitarian calculations because they think that there's other things that are relevant to making moral decisions. Usually people don't even get this far. They just think that like utilitarianism means you should like sacrifice and do bad things in order to bring about a greater good. Like, harvest the organs from the organ donor who's unwilling, actually harvest the organs of like, what is it? The person in the hospital or the doctor to like save 5 lives. Really, in practice, like most effective altruists are utilitarians or consequentialists, but they're not for that kind of thing. They're rather for this kind of expected value reasoning. But you don't have to be utilitarian to be effective altruist. I'm not a utilitarian. Most Christians are not utilitarians or consequentialists, even Christian effective altruists. Although I think we have a leaning towards these kinds
I
of
would
reasoning.
say utilitarianism from the EA Christians I know isn't necessarily a tool that they wouldn't use. Like the expected value calculation and the sort of underlying logic are often used. And I think it's often like there isn't a one size fits all approach to these things. Use the most effective tool in the toolbox for this situation. And in some cases, it will be like a cold hearted utilitarian outcome. But the underlying moral mechanism might not be utilitarianism, but like you said, the expected value calculation thing and the sort of min-maxing behavior, I think even if you're not a utilitarian, is something that I sort of see pretty ubiquitously throughout the EA community for good reason, right? Because it's data driven analytic approaches to doing these things.
And I think this is where reasonable people can disagree with EA ideology, where, again, with the iceberg, if the tip of the iceberg above the water is using data and evidence to do good better, like I don't think reasonable people can disagree with this. I mean, it's almost, what is it, tautologically incorrect that like,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
It's not reasonable to reject reason for doing good, but there are people who have principled stances against totalizing consequentialism. And I think here's where Christians can have important guardrails, and I would argue should have important guardrails and still prioritize key relationships in their lives, like their families and their marriage and their relationship with God. I don't think you should like neglect your prayer life or your prayer practice for the sake of impact. I think you can still do an insane amount of good and you can still do these expected value calculations.
Yeah. So like my biggest criticism of EA is I find a lot of them are really vulnerable to Pascal's mugging. So for those who don't know,
give some examples. Yeah.
Yeah, so Pascal's mugging is this sort of theoretical or this thought experiment where you're walking in a dark alley and then a wizard or a man claiming to be a wizard pops up and basically gives you this scenario in which he says, I'm a magical wizard and I can make as much money as you possibly could imagine if you just hand over your wallet to me. And you think, well, the probability that this man is actually a wizard and this man can actually produce a huge amount of money for me is incredibly low, like incredibly low. But there is sort of like an amount of money he can say where the odds of him actually being a magical wizard who can produce a large amount of money and the odds of him not being a wizard multiplied by the amount of money that you have in your wallet, the sort of expected value calculation of that after he gets past a certain amount of hypothetical money that he'll generate for you, it only makes sense that you give him your wallet at that point in order for him to then potentially give you that much money if that infinitesimally small chance of him actually being a wizard actually turns out to be true. That's sort of the thought experiment. And it's used to say, like, in a lot of these calculations start to become a little wonky when you're starting to deal with incredibly large numbers or incredibly small probabilities, and a lot of ideas can become counterintuitive. It's often like compared to like general relativity or special relativity, where things act normally at certain speeds, but then once you get close to the speed of light, or like
Yes.
really
Things get
really
weird when you bring in infinities.
yeah,
So there's a great philosopher who writes about this, Daniel Rubio. He did some work with, I think, Laura Bushak at Princeton on this. They're both Christian effective altruists, by the way, and they have their own interesting takes on how to deal with these things. I know Laura Bushak has like a risk weighted expected, because a lot of this is connected to expected value reasoning, right? So like small probabilities of massive payouts, and how do you do that? So Laura Bushak has like a way of discounting really low probability things, and it has some papers on that, how to do that consistently. Daniel Rubio has interesting stuff on this, and I've talked to him about what this means for evangelism, right? Because Christians presumably believe in some kind of infinite. It's kind of unorthodox to think that heaven isn't infinite in one important respect, which is time, right? Presumably we don't just like enjoy heaven and God for like 1 million years and then blip. Presumably it's forever, right?
yeah.
And so
Or eternal
of
conscious
course,
torment is forever as well.
oh yes,
The eternal conscious torment is also an infinity.
it's a very it's a very dark thing. But then so there's a question of like, should we all be fanatics about anything
Yeah.
that can have an infinite payout? And I'm curious of your thoughts on that, but I think there's interesting discussions to be had. I know one common criticism that secular effective altruists have of Christian effective altruists is one of inconsistency, that like it would mean, I don't know how common this is, but I perceive it to be quite common, that on a Christian effective altruism, that evangelism must be the most important thing to invest your time and resources in. And I'm a little bit of a fanatic, so I like slightly bite the bullet, but I also think there are other important things that Jesus tells us to do, and I think that lots of things could be infinitely valuable. So I don't know how all the numbers pan out, but I'd be happy to talk more about that. Although it gets quite tricky, quite thorny.
Oh, it definitely does. And like I'm one of those people who's like, I will follow whatever absurd conclusion you think I should follow to its most logical end, so long as you give
I
me
thought you said
solid
that this
reasoning for
is
it.
like something you don't like about EA. This is the
No.
Pascal mugging.
So this is, I don't like I said,
You
I
don't
have
like
EA
it, but
brainworms.
you still you still get mugged, is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. Like I have to unmug myself every single time. But like, I mean, a big part of the way I unmug myself is I used to work in targeting with the military, where your job is to basically decide which ordnance you're going to drop on people to kill the most or the least number of people, depending on what the target
Oh
strike
wow,
package is. And it is
that's a
straight up,
heavy job. Wow.
it is blood calculus, right? Like
Yeah.
that's what we all used to joke about it, like calling it blood calculus. Like, so to be clear, I wasn't the one doing the targeting decisions. I was working in and around targeting. So like,
So you're like in a room with quants figuring out where to drop the bombs.
it's very different. But like, if you want to think about it like that, that's sort of how it's like. And it's intelligence cycles and things like that are a lot more complicated. But that sort of reasoning, I can't argue with it, right? Because it's like, okay, you have this ISIS commander who is, if enabled, going to go and kill all these people. He is surrounded by civilians. Do you drop the bomb? And this is not like a theoretical example that or a thought experiment. This is like a day-to-day reality for a lot of people in the world. And this logic is just very easy to subscribe to and give yourself a moral out, to be like, well, this is just what the numbers said. Like, I just did the most effective, most logical thing. It's like, okay, well, you still killed people. Like you still took people's lives, and like you took innocent lives. You took lives that should not have been killed, who were casualties in collateral damage, and yeah, there are acceptable losses and there are all these things, but like that side of things also makes me go, is this a good way to live your life, right? Like is this a good way to actually think about problems of morality? And for a very long time I was like, yeah, obviously this is the best way. But after doing it for a while, it's sort of like your moral intuitions start to get worn down, and you as a person stop caring about death and suffering, and it all sort of becomes like a mechanical game where it's like, okay, just min max, min max, min max, and that turns you into the type of person that I don't think you should be, regardless if you're a Christian or not. But like this, doing this, treating people like they're quantifiable sums and treating people like they are numbers on a spreadsheet, especially when you're dealing with consequences of life and death, is something that I think just has soul destroying properties. And I hate saying this because I say this and I'm like, well, quantify that. Does it actually, do you have a soul that can be destroyed? How do you know you have a soul that can be destroyed? Can you measure this, or are you talking about some sort of other psychological phenomena? And there are just a lot of inquantifiable untangibles when it comes to this sort of thinking and reasoning that make me go like, okay, is doing blood calculus actually like, is it good for people? Is this a good way to live your life? Is this the right way to live your life?
I think I appreciate you sharing that personal example. I think it's soul destroying in a way, right? And I think there's a reason that veterans who, for instance, fly drones have PTSD at like similar rates of pilots who do. And like,
much higher.
Okay.
And before they
it's higher, right? Because they like follow the lives of people.
Oh yeah, like it's way higher. Months
before they bomb them, right?
Like, it's similar. So that's what used to happen. They had to split those jobs into two. So they had to split the intelligence role and the operator role into two distinct categories, so that the people doing the killing aren't aware that you just killed them and like their cousin who like had a great personal relationship with. It's similar rates of PTSD to snipers who sit there and watch a target for 2 weeks, and you see them taking their kids to soccer practice, and like you see their patterns of life, you see them talk to their wife, and then you have to shoot them. Things like that happen. And from an EA perspective, it's very easy to give yourself an out from that situation and to sort of think, well, no, this had to be done because he was a dangerous person. He was a dangerous man who was doing dangerous things. And if he wasn't killed, what would we have done? Like, I was in EA while I was in the military.
Oh, wow.
And used EA logic to justify what I was doing. And most other people that I was serving with who were in my sort of roles were either EA or EA adjacent, or thought like me, or use that to sort of morally justify the things that we're doing. And that comes with like, it's sort of, the logic of it is I mean, most EAs, by the way, are not in the military, right?
Yeah,
most EAs,
the vast majority.
Most EAs are very anti-war, and
like, right?
Yeah, and they're sort of nice Bay Area tech guys.
That's right. Like very,
like
very comfortable, highly educated.
Yes,
skewing left of center.
Yeah, most
tech rationalist types. Yeah. So
most of them aren't in targeting cells in wars in the Middle East.
Are you in a LinkedIn group?
I'm not. No.
Okay, because there's a LinkedIn group of veterans in EA.
Yeah,
and current and former service members.
And so like, these are ideas that I fully bought into, and also like sort of.
So what
felt
changed?
Like,
did you change, or did you just?
I converted to Christianity. That's the short answer.
You talked about this on other episodes, but I would welcome any like specific reflections from your conversion on this point. In fact,
yeah. So I mean, I'm still EA adjacent. I call myself, right. Like I agree that sort of the two top tiers of the iceberg, I'm fully on board, right? Where it's like, this is obviously correct, and this is obviously what you should be doing. But it's when you get to that like third, fourth, fifth tier of EA where I start to go like, I used to be in like the 5th tier,
Mm.
and this had deleterious. This made me a person that I didn't like to be, and I didn't like that I was that type of person, but that was mostly because I was also in the military, right? Like the
Mm.
reason,
Mm.
if I was working for Facebook or something like that, I would still probably be like tier 5, but
Mm.
I wasn't, right? Like I was in a job in which I had fully taken on this logic, fully bought
So,
into it,
so
and
are
then
you
used
now a
it to these
pacifist,
ends.
or what's your current view of?
I'm not a pacifist. I mean, despite being raised Mennonite, I'm not.
Oh,
Um,
that's, I didn't know we had that Mennonite connection. That's very cool.
yeah, I was raised Mennonite brethren, and then, like every good Mennonite, joined the army at age 18. So that
Was
didn't
there?
stick too well,
Wow.
obviously.
Did
Yeah, so
you reconcile
I
with your parents after that one, or?
oh yeah, yeah. So
Oh,
I
my
joked.
iPhone just said, "Sorry, I don't understand."
Oh.
Yeah, my iPhone is like commenting on this. I don't know what cued it.
Yeah, so I joke MB stands for mostly Baptist, and so we went to a Mennonite Brethren church because that was
Okay.
the closest conservative evangelical church in the area, and there wasn't another one for quite a while. It's rural Saskatchewan. It's kind of how it
Okay.
goes
Okay.
sometimes. So like we weren't super Mennonite, but yeah. So I joined the army when I was age 18. I don't know. Like I don't I'm not a pacifist. Like at a certain point, I think sometimes people like the only way to deal with them is through violence, and I think the only way that you can stop some of these people is through violence. Like most of
Well,
my
the
military.
thought experiment, right?
Yeah.
Take the typical one. I think they made a film about it, right? It's like torture is like there's a terrorist, suspected
Yep.
terrorist, actually known terrorist, right? A known
Yep.
terrorist who has information about where a dirty bomb in Los Angeles is that will go off and kill 250,000 people, and you don't get information from him. Like, do you begin to torture his? Right? Is the
Yeah.
story like, do you torture his family? I guess the stylized case is like, if you knew for sure that by torturing one innocent person, you would save 250,000 lives, innocent lives. Would you do it?
And like so my military self would say yes. Obviously we should do that. And I don't like that about about myself, right? Like I don't like the fact that I'm the type of person who over the years of conditioning to think like this, I'm sort of trapped in my own brain in a way that is just like
Yeah.
uncompassionate, unloving, unable to like this there's this poet from the First World War named Wilfred Owen who writes about the intense dehumanizing effects of war and how it turns you from a man into a machine. And he starts off one of his poems with the lines, "Happy is the man who yet before he dies can let his blood run cold." And like this is sort of, and it's like it's a play on the Beatitudes, right?
Yeah.
Blessed are the meek, and it's like
Uh,
these types of things. And like I feel like I've fully gone through that process, and part of the facilitation of me going through that process and like forming me mentally was this sort of strict utilitarian values based blood calculus that I'm trying to unlearn, but at
mm,
the same time the logic of it is just so appealing to
yeah.
me, where I'm like this is and so this is where I'm like, look, EA stuff makes sense, at least this sort of the first 2 tiers, where I don't think there are good arguments against it, that you should analyze, you should steward the resources that you were given
Right. Yeah.
meaningfully.
I mean, to be clear, this kind of this kind of trade off about when to use
Yeah.
violence is very different than the relevant trade off that we
Yeah.
have to make about whom to help with our charitable dollars.
Yeah.
Unless
Or
if we're
like,
considering funding like a war, which
yeah.
is probably not what people
I
listening
mean,
to this are.
our EAs for FPV drones, is that a thing?
No,
Where,
I don't think so. I
yeah,
mean, and
I
I
don't
think,
think that is a thing.
yeah, yeah. So I think there's an
Yeah. And like,
overwhelmingly strong case that Christians should be
yeah.
at least kind of old school effective altruists using lots of their money to give to the global poor in effective ways by donating to
Yep.
charities like the Against Malaria Foundation, where I think you said you give most of your
Yep.
donations to, or do you do GiveWell, the charity evaluator that recommends charities, do you give to their maximum impact fund? Is that primarily what you give to, or?
Yeah, so I do both. So I just give one chunk to the Against Malaria Foundation and then the other chunk to GiveWell. Yeah, like if people are listening to this, they're not like blasted by the last 10 minutes of discussion. GiveWell is a great charity
Well,
that does all of this sort of calculation for
they
you
help you
so that
give
you don't
well.
have.
So yeah,
Yes,
they're
yes,
basically founded by hedge fund types who wanted to help people give well, because there were very few organizations that didn't just measure overhead like Charity Navigators historically focused on, but also measured impact per dollar. And they're interested in looking at high quality evidence using robust studies to measure causality. What programs don't just correlate with impact, but are really plausibly causally impactful. And showed hundreds of criticisms for various different programs, whether that's bed nets or vitamin A distribution, trying to figure out what would make this program fail and not be impactful. And the 4 top charities that they have on their website are the 4 that have sort of risen from the ashes of everything else that burned down through the purifying fire. The 4
yeah.
charities they have are like the 4 standouts of, yes, these are really effective and have passed that are like massive testing of, I think they do 60,000 hours of tests every year.
And so like it's probably the resource I would recommend people look into. Also, just I think a lot of the EA animal welfare stuff is also sort of obviously right, where you should be concerned about animal suffering, and you should be concerned about these types of things. Again, I think that's something that, although not necessary for Christianity, is something that Christians, I think, should at least be conscious of or think of. Like it
Is
it
this
it
going to your
is
Mennonite background at all? Do you think that sowed a
no.
seed?
No. Probably not.
I went
I'm not gonna
vegetarian
lie.
because you know Greg Boyd, the
Yeah, of course.
yeah, no, he convinced me to go vegetarian, and then I
Okay,
learned
yeah,
about factory farming and was
yeah,
super frightened by what's going on.
yeah, yeah. And so I think having these concerns are like I think there's a huge overlap where if you don't go too far down the iceberg, there's a lot of coherence with Christianity and EA, and I think it's something that a lot of autistic people would benefit from, and a lot of autistic people would like. I know in our Discord we've had quite a few discussions about EA and GiveWell and effectively evaluating charities and things like that. And they're not even EAs; they're just people who had questions about, well, what is the most efficient charity to give to? And it's like, well, you don't have to do this work for yourself. Someone already did. You should check
Yes.
them out. And so it's something that I think autistic people would just be interested in as well. Another thing that I wanted to touch on, if you're willing, is Christians for Impact and your jobs and career advising side of things. Are you happy to talk about that?
Yeah, and I'm conscious of time, so if you're still listening so far, you're doing a fantastic job.
Yeah.
Thank you for yeah. Anyways, I run also Christians for Impact, which is actually the organization that EA for Christians is born out of. So with Christians for Impact, we do career advising, and our career advising is impact focused and faith based. And so if you come to us because you're not sure about what to do with your career, we'll give you free one-on-one advice. We'll pray with you. We'll connect you with mentors and just people you can network with. And our advice is problem focused. So we're not just looking for anybody who needs a job. We're looking for talented people, talented Christians who have a range of things they could do, but are interested in finding a job that would have a maximum impact on key problem areas like factory farming, like extreme global poverty, like missions. And if that's you, we'd love to connect with you. And we have a bunch of resources on our website. We have a podcast. We actually just had somebody from GiveWell on. So by the time this comes out, that should be up. Sarah from GiveWell. So we talk about malaria. If you're like skeptical of malaria nets, that'd be a good one to listen to. But I love what we do there. We do maybe about 100 advising sessions a year, and we're just a couple years old. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. So, do you have any parting words, final thoughts, or anything else that you would like to send out to the audience of autistic Christians that's probably listening?
Yeah, awesome. So you can do an incredible amount of good with your money and with your time. Take those really seriously. Those are probably like your 2 biggest resources to do good in the world. And So if you're convinced by this, I would encourage you to take a giving pledge. The standard pledge is 10% of your lifetime income to the charities you believe are most effective. So why take a pledge if you're a Christian, especially when the Bible says, when you give, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Well, I think pledges are a good way to hold ourselves accountable. And we can make an anonymous pledge, but I think we can make a pledge to ourselves. Even after pray about it, make a pledge to God to steward the resources that actually belong to Him in ways that would serve others and glorify Him in a way that would satisfy that Matthew 25 command, because we're all going to die one day and have to give an account to Christ of how we use what we had to do good. And so I would encourage you to take the 10% pledge like I've taken, like John's taken. And you can do that on our website by Googling Christians for Impact 10% pledge or the Giving What We Can website. You can also talk to me. You can book a call with me on the EA for Christians website, or you can come to our conference. We have a conference in DC, November 1st to 2nd, and in London, probably November 22nd, but that'll come up any day. Yeah.
Nice. I'm going to try to make it either this year or next year. That's been my goal, but we'll see how that pans out with family and other obligations. But
nice.
Yeah, cool.
Thanks for having me on. It's been great.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you very much. If you'd like to find me, you can find me on Twitter at ChristianityOn. You can find me on Bluesky at ChristianityOn. .bluesky.social, or you can email me christianityonthespectrum@gmail.com. If you like and enjoy this podcast, consider liking, sharing, subscribing, or rating and I forget, just do those things that help me improve my research and the reach of this podcast. That's all for me. Anything else, JD?
That's all. Thanks so much.
All right, see you later. Just on a personal note, before I end this podcast, last week I put out my first ad for asking for donations for the Against Malaria Foundation, and I would just like to say thank you to everyone who donated. I really did not expect this level of support. We raised almost $600 Canadian. That is huge. Like that is so much, and it just motivates me a lot to keep doing this work and is genuinely meaningful to me, and I just want to say thank you and try to express how much I really truly appreciate how much support you've given me thus far. Anyway, thank you so much again. Bye.